Welcome back, everyone, to the Jurassic HR Podcast. Andy here, and joining me is a lady by the name of Shelley Poole. And if you are an HR consultant, you are going to know this lady. She is the owner and director of Wellington HR, HR consultant helping HR consultants. So if we need a day off or we need to go sick or whatever reason, you can bring the wonderful Shelley in to help out. Shelley, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Oh, it's lovely to be here, Andy, and I'm safe and well, thank you. And you are too?
Yeah, we're very good. My whole family are good, considering we are taping this on the 5th of November. It's day one of lockdown, the sequel. So it's going to be very interesting to see where we go. Bit of information which we'll share is you and I had this planned out about 2 weeks ago.
We did.
And the whole world seems to have changed in that period of time.
It does. Lockdown 2.0 was hypothetical at the time, and now it has become a reality, and we've had lots of news around furlough leave and other things as well, so that gives us plenty to talk about today.
It really does, and it's quite scary how quick it is changing. I mean, only 2 hours ago today, we're recording this at 2:05, at about 2:05 midday, it was announced that furlough is being extended until March 21. Now, originally, we should be in the job support scheme right now. We then found out it was being extended till the end of November, now the end of March. What's your take on that? What do you think the mindset behind Rishi Sunak is in terms of extending that until March of 21?
I mean, sadly, he's not taking my calls at the moment. But if I was going to hypothesize, you can either take a pessimistic view of it and mean that means we're going to be in lockdown in some form throughout that period of time. My personal feeling is that I'd be surprised if any government wants to keep us in lockdown over Christmas unless they absolutely have to. But we could then be looking at lockdown 3.0 come the new year. So there could be a bit of that. The more optimistic view of it is that the furlough scheme provides companies with reassurance in order to be able to build back up again. So when spring comes, they're in a fighting position rather than having to make sudden redundancy decisions now. So there's different takes on it, and none of us has a crystal ball at the moment, sadly.
Well, we're still waiting for guidance to come out. I mean, we're still waiting for guidance to come out from from this past weekend when they made the announcement.
We are, yes. And, some of that has been changing as well. So Boris in his sort of initial Saturday evening speech, there was a moment it seemed like he was indicating that sort of all clinically vulnerable people might need to either be working from home or not going to work. And now the guidance has come out and clarified that it's extremely clinically vulnerable people, so the people who were formerly in the shielding category, who that applies to, rather than the sort of standard clinically vulnerable group. But it's difficult to sort of keep up with these things, and I think my main hope would be the extension of furlough leave until March means that there is lots of new things for employers to be doing their homework on every 5 minutes, because the maths around the job support scheme when they first announced it was a real headache for a lot of people. Myself included.
Yeah, and me, I kind of looked at it going, I'm hopefully not going to have any of my clients wanting to use the JSS, because trying to process it was going to be
so many thirds of thirds. It's a bit much.
I was talking to a payroll manager, a friend of mine, who were talking about possibly bringing JSS into that organization, and I think she literally cried when the first piece of information came out, because of the fact it is just so complex to kind of analyze it and go with that. Whereas furlough's been difficult as it is, but JSS even worse. I mean, it's interesting when you look at the fact that the government are keeping it on an 80% minimum. So if employers want to top it up to the 100%, which I imagine a lot will, they are getting that incentive to put people back onto furlough and to continue it going. I suppose one thing that I'm not sure about, and I'm not sure if you've heard this, Shelley, is in January, they were saying that anyone who came back from furlough, you would receive a £1,000 return.
Yeah.
Is that still happening?
Saying.
Yeah.
Well, on the grapevine today is that is being suspended.
Right.
That, and I say on the grapevine with caution, because I haven't read it from official government guidance yet, but I've seen it sort of in press reportings around the HR community, which I think would be a great shame. But the flip side of that is that bonus was £1,000 per employee, subject to relevant earning criteria. Ultimately, furlough leave is worth more.
Yeah.
So, and I think there are some important differences between furlough leave and the job support scheme, not just related to all those splattered thirds, but in terms of sort of, when it can apply as well, which are useful for employers. So the job support scheme was very clearly defined as only for jobs that were seen as viable on an ongoing basis. So if an employee was given notice of redundancy, then they couldn't remain on the JSS. Whereas under furlough leave, the rules that applied up until the end of October were that employees on furlough leave could actually be on their notice, having been given redundancy notice. Employers would then need to top that up potentially to 100% to not be in breach of contract. But there was the potential there that sort of, employers could use furlough leave to really get their house in order in terms of who they think they're going to need going forward. And I don't want to sit here and encourage any unnecessary redundancies, but ultimately there are some situations where redundancies save other jobs and save businesses. And so if employers are looking at that, the window until March actually gives an opportunity, to review things as much as anyone can, given we can't really plan when we don't know how long we're in lockdown for.
Exactly. And I think it's very difficult to see how the landscape is going to change between where we were back in March to where we are, going to be in March of 21. I mean, this year has completely changed recruitment. It's changed business strategy. It's changed ways of working. Everything that you and I knew as HR professionals has got turned on its head, and we're having to learn new skills and new ways of working.
Definitely. I remember those happy days when you used to get an annual employment law update rather than a weekly one from the Treasury at 5 o'clock on a Friday. but all I can say is thank goodness, that we have had, things like furlough leave, because I think the landscape in terms of unemployment would look very different were it not for that.
I mean, all we can do is, as consultants and as HR professionals, is kind of hope that this furlough scheme will help give the economy a bit of a stimulus when we come out of lockdown, whenever that may be, and people start coming back. But I think if you're looking at kind of like the manufacturing sector, which is where I've come from, it's going to take a long time for those industries to start coming back, because the order book is going to be low, especially if you're international operations, so you're dealing with Asia or the US. We'll touch on that later. And any other place. It's going to take time for that order book to come back. So then you are risking just continuously keeping people in limbo. So I suppose the one flip to that is it's great for employers because they've got this window, but actually in terms of employees, does it affect their mental health being on furlough for that amount of time and out of the business environment?
I think so. I think there has been a bit of an us and them culture at different points in recent months, where perhaps employees who have remained in the business might have been taking on extra work, dealing with everything in a very survival mode type mindset, very busy. And they might have looked at their colleagues on furlough leave and thought, oh, well, that's really nice for you. You've painted your house, you've mowed your lawn, you've sorted out your garden, you're on 80% of your pay, you haven't had to drive anywhere, what are you fussing about? But actually, the uncertainty will have had an impact. And also, I know some people are at work solely for the money, but a lot of people work because they're passionate about what they do and they enjoy their job and they enjoy the purpose that it brings in their life. And the idea of couple of days off to watch Netflix might not seem that bad, but when it stretches over an extended period, that will be having an impact. And I would urge sort of, any employers listening to or watching this to, really make sure that they are communicating regularly with employees on furlough leave. So even if they can't give any cast iron guarantees, they at least feel like they're part of the business still, and they understand what's going on. And to pick up on what you were saying a minute ago, that limbo sort of, whilst furlough leave is helpful, it still has costs to employers. The well-intended Martin Lewis caused quite a bit of trouble at the start of lockdown by announcing that employees could be kept on furlough leave at no cost to employers. And whilst at that time the government was making more contribution than it is at the moment in terms of pensions and national insurance and things like that, it's still not true, because employees continue to accrue holiday, during any period of time that they're on furlough leave, as you'll well know, Andy. And so, keeping people on furlough leave indefinitely, if people do end up on furlough leave for the best part of 12 months, that's if they're on statutory annual leave, that's their 5.6 weeks annual leave that they're owed. And so it's not, I think there's a bit of a sort of an idea that furlough leave doesn't cost anything, and so it's just this magic sticking plaster. But it isn't. As you say, it has an impact on employees. They don't necessarily know what they're doing with their lives and what their future looks like. And it does have costs to employers as well.
But as well as that, though, Shelley, it's got costs to you and I, because at some point, someone is going to have to repay this national debt that we're accumulating via the furlough. Now, I know in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the pandemic itself, if you look at the amount of cases that we're having now and the unfortunate deaths that we've had during the 12 months, some people will say that's not important at this time. But actually, it's not going to be us that's going to be reaping the disadvantage of this. It's going to be our kids in the next generation, because we're already seeing that when the schools were closed, little ones couldn't go in, education was suffering, the GCSE results, A-level results, etc. But now you've got to think about national insurance and income tax and the rate of mortgages and everything else. I mean, it's going to take a lot for us to pay that stimulus back.
It is, and it could be sort of argued that the extension of furlough leave indicates that kind of as a nation we've developed a bit of a arguably an unhealthy reliance on it, sort of, and that actually I'm sure you'll have dealt, Andy, with employment contracts with short time working and layoff clauses in. If we didn't have furlough leave and statutory guarantee pay was applicable in these situations, it would come as sort of, quite a shock, I should think. But no, I agree. It is sort of, going to be a long-term question in terms of the nation's finances. But what I would say, in case anyone's thinking, gosh, this is the gloomiest podcast I've ever listened to in my life, what I would say is that I've been dealing with a number of clients who are busier as a result of this. Just to give one example, a company that produces lots of sort of, wooden items for people's gardens and things, including garden offices. Their order book is through the roof, as you can probably imagine. Through the roof, no pun intended. But they are very busy with that, and there are sort of speaking to different clients, there are different parts of the economy who are finding themselves busy, and are relieved that the government guidance on this occasion has specified that manufacturing can keep going, so that all of those processes can keep moving through.
Which I think is great. I think the government have learnt from the mistakes or the learning experiences from what happened at lockdown 1, and we're picking that up now, and we're seeing the changes. I had to laugh when you said the gloomiest podcast ever, because that wasn't the intention for this one when we started off. We were all just sat there going, furlough extended again, furlough extended again. But
it is, I think it's an opportunity, for employers to kind of catch breath, because when it was just for November, that did seem very, okay, that's quick. We're already in November, at this point. So it is good. And, I would encourage, managing costs. So a lot of people do not necessarily know, for example, that employees can be required to take some of their annual leave if they're given sufficient notice. And that notice is statutorily double the amount of time that you want them to take off. So if you want an employee to take off a week, you have to give them 2 weeks notice. Why am I telling you this? Well, under the furlough leave scheme, as it was up until the 31st of October, so we hope it can continue, employers are able to ask their employees to take some time off, some annual leave whilst they're on furlough leave, and the employer only has to top up the 20% rather than paying all of the annual leave. And so I think measures like that this longer extended furlough leave period, I think measures like that give an opportunity for employers to start thinking about things like that, so they're not accruing those big scary costs come March.
Exactly. Once you get to that end of that year period and you start thinking, a company that I used to work for, their holiday period started at the beginning of April. So you're thinking we're going up to March, and a lot of these people have been on furlough for the year now. It's going to be an interesting thing, and it's going to be interesting to see where we go. Let's talk about some of the other then employment costs, because part of this session today we were going to talk about was the cost of employment through this COVID period. Obviously, furlough has taken a massive hit in terms of the costing. Where do we go from here then? So how has the cost of employment changed throughout 2020?
Well, it's very sector specific, I'd say. There are reports of very large organizations as well as smaller organizations encouraging working from home where possible to do so, sort of on a medium term basis at least, so not just as defined by government. And so if they then deem that to be a success, then potentially, if you're not having to have all of that office space in order to employ people, that can help with your costs. I'm going to be quite interested to see sort of how some of the larger companies get on with that, because on the one hand, working from home offers so many wonderful benefits to people who've got a nice, comfortable setup to do that, and the relevant facilities and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, we're in sort of quite uncharted waters just in terms of going, what impact does that have on team building, on creativity, collaboration? And I'm not sort of sitting here saying I have an answer to that. I think it's definitely one to watch. So so potentially there are some sort of cost savings there for employers, but whether they bear through remains to be seen. In terms of your other costs, I think that management time is important as well. And of course, I think HR is important because I'm an HR person, but I keep hearing stories about HR people who've been put on furlough leave, and then all the workforce don't know what's going on because HR was actually kind of the driving force in communications and looking after people. And so you've then just got sort of people surreptitiously trying to contact HR via Facebook Messenger or something. and so I think this goes back to what you're saying about mental health. Actually, an absent workforce still needs a bit of that pastoral support, a bit of that sort of care of good management. So I think there's still a cost there.
I think it's still very difficult for managers and for employees to kind of get acclimatized to the remote working and the way from home, because even doing what we're doing now, Zoom has become one of the most used phrases in the English vocabulary this year.
Yes.
But there is still something about, I'm sat in my home, you're sat in your office, and we're having this video communication, which is great because we're seeing each other, but you're still not in the same environment. And I think you made a reference earlier on that people like to come into work. They like the passion of their job. I think as well, they like the social interactivity of being in their place of employment. They like the friendship groups that they've got that they can go and have a coffee with in the canteen or a natter during an 11 o'clock team meeting. And doing it remotely isn't quite the same as being in that environment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there are some exceptions to it. I mean, there was one client, or there is a client that I work with where one of the employees, we've been giving them quite a bit of support earlier on in the year, sort of in terms of their mental health, like right at the start of the year this was. And then when all of this happened, when we went into lockdown, and of course it was so sudden, sort of back in March, I was really concerned for this individual's mental health. And they absolutely loved it. They were really happy in their own little bubble. They didn't have, all of the stress of getting to work and parking and then having to deal with all of the social interactions that they were finding quite stressful, it turned out. So, some people are very happy working in that way. But other people, are struggling, and just anecdotally, people do miss it. And to come onto a call like this, or even just to pick up a phone and have an old-fashioned phone call, you tend to feel like you need to have a bit of a purpose to do that. Whereas when you're sat in an office with someone, just, I don't know, those casual conversations, oh, what have you got there for your lunch? That sort of thing. You're not going to ring someone and ask them what they're having for lunch at home. It would just be ridiculous, but those conversations count for people. And I've been having lots of conversations with employers recently, and you'd think this sounds so trivial, but actually it's important, about Christmas parties.
Oh, yeah.
About what are they going to do at Christmas? They always do their Christmas party, and they don't want to not mark it. But of course, you can't realistically plan a face-to-face get together, and all sorts of exciting things like virtual escape rooms, and I don't know, what one client is holding a virtual Great British Bake Off, although I don't know how they're going to work out whether or not anyone's cake actually tastes nice, but still maybe it's all about the decorating. But sort of video game tournaments, all sorts of things like that. And I think when you're in a management role and you feel like, oh gosh, we're going to make a loss for the year, and you're really worrying about the survival of the company, stuff like how we're going to organize a virtual Christmas party for the staff sounds quite trivial, but actually I'd say it's really important. And include your people on furlough leave as well.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think if you're a company that has a culture of socializing and social events throughout the year, for a summer party, or I know a company that had a new office extension opened, and they did a barbecue, and they gave everybody tickets, and they went out and did a barbecue in the front. A small gesture, but it was brilliant. You suddenly lose all of that. That impacts the culture of that organization and the selling point of that organization. This same company that I've just referred to, they're doing a Christmas raffle, which they do every year, and they're inviting everybody who's bought a ticket onto a WebEx video call. And basically what they're saying is, you buy a ticket, that ticket goes into the prize fund, and they've got prizes such as Nintendo Switches or TVs or games consoles or things like that. So they've really kind of gone, this is what we normally do, but we're going to maximize it by a factor of 10 to give you something back and make it as enjoyable as they can, because that's their culture. And it is very difficult, like you said, to do that. And I think managers are beginning to realize that actually they need to know their teams and their individual employees more closely and more personally than maybe what they did when they were all in the office at the same time. Conducting a team meeting, just going boom, 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 this is your agenda points, isn't going to cut it anymore. Now it needs to be, what's going on with you? Are you okay? What are you finding? Is anything concerning you? That more of that pastoral care, like you mentioned earlier on, but on a one-on-one basis with that manager and that employee.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And things, that example's great, particularly as the most exciting thing I've ever won in a raffle is like a dusty bubble bath or something, that someone's brought in. but things don't have to cost money. I know we've probably all done enough Zoom quizzes to last us a lifetime, but just little things like that are actually better than nothing. And some people can choose to opt out. I know some people don't like forced fun, but it's part of the culture. Because of course it's not just the employees who you had with you pre-lockdown 1.0, because some companies are growing and there is sometimes that natural turnover of staff. Some employees will have had some employers will have had new employees who they've had to induct during this period, and those people might never have been into the office or the plant or wherever you are at all, and they don't know the company culture, and they're potentially nervously trying to reach out and build relationships with people using platforms such as Zoom. Other video conferencing apps are available. So you've got to sort of make sure that there's something for them as well, because it can be pretty lonely being a new employee at the moment, I'd say.
Oh yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I mean, as someone who's only recently set up a consultancy business this year, it's the same sort of thing. You've suddenly gone from being a team environment to being on your own and being your own boss. And it's trying to network with other consultants like yourself is actually invaluable when we're when we're doing this type of thing, because we get to bounce ideas off and have those conversations with what you would have as a team. And I completely agree. I created an induction program for a company which was moved from physical, obviously, because the place is shut, to online base. And you try taking that interactive element to make it so you're not just sat in front of a PC, you're actually doing things, you're getting involved, we threw some Taskmaster challenges in to get them to do things, and put it on the X Drive. And people will buy into that because it's different and they're getting some sort of response back.
Yeah, I think so, because Zoom fatigue is an expression that we've probably all heard during the year and hadn't heard previously. But it is sitting looking at a screen like this is pretty draining. And I really didn't think I'd be spending the year looking at my own reflection quite so much. I've got used to it now, but it's a bit uncomfortable to start with.
I just realized I've got to get my hair cut more often, which is quite I only had it done a couple of weeks ago, but it's very interesting to see. We've talked about furlough, we've talked about culture, we've talked about engagement, but actually when you look at HR as a business unit, we have changed so dramatically over the past 12 months, to the point that whereas there may have been a thought that HR doesn't deserve a seat on the board, and HR doesn't deserve the recognition here, and HR doesn't deserve it's not a valuable piece of the business commodity. I think 2020 and this global pandemic has proven that actually HR is an integral aspect of the business. HR is an integral aspect of a return on investment and deserves a seat on the board, because we're literally having to drive things to make sure companies and employees and employers are safe, are legally binding, and have got the right information at the right time. Would you agree with that? Or
I think because there's the old-fashioned model of HR is a subset of the finance department, which always makes me laugh, because I don't think finance people ever particularly seem to enjoy talking about HR matters. No. But I'm sure there are some. But please introduce yourself to me if so. But no. So there's that old-fashioned, and to be honest, the speed with which we needed to react to things. Back in March in particular, but at different points throughout this whole thing, HR, the old-fashioned reputation of HR is all just the tea and sympathy, the fluffy stuff, not at all. It was, there have been days where I've spent the whole day on my phone, during this, just providing advice on furlough leave, and I know that advice was so critical to those companies, and I'm not saying that in a blowing my own trumpet way or anything like that, but just because I know they needed that advice in a really timely way, and the idea that would go through through a department and then back to the key decision makers, there wasn't time for that. We needed to get on with it. And I think when I look at I know lots of other HR consultants, as you can imagine, and when I look at the speed of the reaction and the collaboration within the HR community to make sure that we had the documentation that we needed, that we understood the rules, I think is absolutely fantastic. And it has been HR's time to prove its role, and I hope that different organizations will consider that job done, and consider increasing the significance of HR at a strategic level going forward.
I think they have to, and I think they're kind of missing a boat if they don't, because it is a completely different field out there now to what it was even in January of 2020. And you got to think we're in a new decade. No one expected to start the 20s off with a global pandemic. It's just crazy.
But you know what, with that, I would say though, is that it's been hard for HR people as well. Different people will have had different experiences, but particularly if you're a standalone HR person, in an in-house role or something. And so whilst we've been talking about looking after the mental health of employees and the role of management in that, I think it's important for HR to be collaborative, and the way that we're speaking at the moment, but B, you know, seek out resources and things for yourself. So, for example, if you're a CIPD member, they have a support line that CIPD members can call and, you know, get some welfare support, essentially, in terms of, you know, managing their mental health and things of that nature. And I'm not saying everyone must ring that now, but if you feel like you need someone to talk to and you're in a standalone role, and because it does weigh heavy, you know, sort of. I'm yet to meet another HR person who kind of can just, or any HR person, you know, because I include myself, who's just like, oh yeah, redundancy, it's just a job, whatever. You know, it weighs heavy. And of course it's worse for the person who's losing their job than you as an HR person, but you still need to look after yourself and make sure you can look after other people.
I think it's one of those things. I remember when I was trained, I had a mentor, a lovely lady called Jackie Brownlee, and she worked for some big companies like the bus industry and TfL. And she once said to me, and it's words, and I've said this to everyone who I've mentored or I've trained or who I've worked with: if you can go into a room and you've got to make someone redundant, or you've got to terminate them, or you've got to have a disciplinary, and you know it's going to be a grievance, and you walk in and you don't get butterflies in your stomach, you should not be in this industry anymore. And that's when you realize, and if you get to that point, you're at burnout stage. And I think that's when you need to seek some help. And yes, CIPD do run the EAP, and we'll put details in the narrative on here as well. And it's invaluable. And there's so many communities out there for HR people now, both on LinkedIn, on Facebook, too many to name, and I wouldn't want to sit here and name a couple of them because it's unfair, but the community is, pardon?
Favoritism, can't have favoritism.
Absolutely. You know, other groups are available. You know, the sitting there and seeing the conversations and just helping people out it's been amazing, in the sharing of resources, and it has, I think, really brought us together as an industry, and as a division, rather than separated us, which is what it could have done. Unlike, you know, the US, which we yeah. We think things are bad.
I was supposed to say, this podcast isn't long enough for that, is it?
Yeah, we think things are bad, but they're not that bad. As we record this, we still don't know who is the president of the United States, so which is radically scary. I don't know. It
is, but I can't say that I'm hugely surprised. I think, you know, I think sort of, even if there'd been a Democratic landslide, I think sort of Trump had made it fairly clear he was going to dig his heels in. But yes, yeah. But there we go. As you say, at least we've just got furlough leave to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah, we've just got furlough. Can we talk about the US?
Yes. Yeah.
Talk about squatters' rights in the White House, because I think that's what they're going to be doing at some point. Oh, Shelley, tell us a bit more. I mean, we've had a really good conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you about the topics that we've been discussing. But tell us more about you, because, and I'm gonna praise you here, because I put the advertisement up on LinkedIn that you were coming on the show. As of this time, I think I've had something like 1,800 views of that post. And comments have gone absolutely mental, with people saying, it's amazing you've got Shelley on, and it's going to be a great interview, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great. I mean, you are really one of the most respected HR professionals I think I've dealt
no, I just paid them to comment.
You did?
Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah.
That was your trick. I was going to ask you what the trick was. Tell us more about you, though. I mean, your career spans years. Now you're no, I don't mean that in a negative way. But
careful.
You know, I'm a professional podcaster. I've been doing this for 10 years, but you know, you wouldn't tell today. Tell us more about you and your career.
So I've been doing HR consultancy for a good few years now, and my company is Wellington HR, but most people won't have heard of Wellington HR, because actually I work with other HR consultants. So you know, when I talk about the importance of collaboration, I'd like to think, you know, I walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Because, as you said in your introduction, I sort of work with other HR consultants to help out if they need cover, but I also sort of, get involved in situations where an independent person is needed to come in and do an investigation. And we've seen some interesting ones sort of, around COVID recently. I've just been involved in an investigation for an employee who hadn't followed social distancing rules and not social distancing, self-isolation rules when someone in the household developed symptoms. And that led to a whole workplace being shut down and a deep clean being necessitated and some pretty substantial costs given it was a manufacturing organisation.
Wow.
So I sort of work with other HR people and sort of, come in and help out when I'm needed and then go away again when I'm not. And I love that because I don't want to be in competition with the HR community. I want to work with people, even though it's just me and my own business at the moment. Actually, I like working with other people. So I work with various HR consultants across, Somerset, Dorset, and going up to Wiltshire and across. So that's what I do. My last in-house HR job was with the RNLI, the lifeboats, in Poole, which fantastic organisation to work for. Yeah, but learned a lot there, especially because as part of your induction, you get to go out on the lifeboats, which is fantastic. Loved that. Yes. So that was fabulous. And I've done a bit of teaching on things like the CIPD qualifications, for example. And so, yes. And so I've also taught in A-levels and the A-level business, and my heart, broke back in the summer for all of those students, with what happened around their grades. And yeah, I really hope that, by the time they did decide to do the predicted grades, it meant that students could then get their places at university and that they hadn't been snapped up sort of by others. But yes, so as you say, I have been around HR for a while, but I enjoy HR because I think even when you've got to give bad news, like, the dreaded R word, redundancy, actually, I think HR has got a really important role to play in making sure that things are done fairly. And us as HR people, we're talking about really big issues today. We're talking about a global pandemic and, and the mess that is the US presidential election at this precise moment in time. I can't change any of those things, even if I can go on a bit with my opinions on some of them. My poor husband puts up with a lot. But I can't change any of those things. But what I can change is I can work with clients and make sure that I understand their business. And so if they're making decisions from an HR perspective, it kind of works for their business. And then even if we're giving bad news to employees, I can make sure that things are sort of being done fairly and properly, and that's best for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Shelley, I mean, it's great. I'm looking forward to working with you. Excuse me. I'm looking forward to working with you more collaboratively in the future as well. And,
yeah,
it's going to be really interesting to see where we go in the future in terms of HR, in terms of the UK, in terms of employment, in terms of recruitment. We've touched on so many different topics today that I think it's kind of encompassed the whole cost of employment throughout this COVID pandemic. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to join me on this podcast today.
No, thank you very much for having me. And, who knows what we'll be talking about in the future? Because, of course, all the information we've given out today is, correct at the time of publication, as they always say in the newspapers. But, things are changing really fast at the moment. And so let's see what tomorrow holds.
Hopefully not another press release that we're going to have to. Shelley, I'd love to bring you back on again in the future if you're happy to come back on and to continue doing it. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, and thank you for your time. If you want to get in contact with Shelley, if you're an HR consultant and you want Shelley's support, how can they get in contact with you?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, and my company's Wellington HR, and I'm Shelley Poole. Or they're welcome to drop me a message directly at shelley@wellingtonhr.co.uk. And I'm sure if anyone gets in touch with you, Andy, you can put them in touch.
Of course I can. Absolutely at all. If you want to get in contact with us, you can do. It's inquiries@jurassichr.co.uk, or visit the website jurassichr.com, or find me on LinkedIn. Shelley, it's been amazing. I have really enjoyed the last 30, 40 minutes speaking to you, and I'm sure our audience have enjoyed it as well. That's it for us this week on this edition of the JHR podcast. And yeah, we will see you all soon. Until next time, stay tuned to the newsletters and stay tuned to more furlough guidance.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.